Hello, and welcome to the Cycle Breaker Parents Unite podcast. And this week, I'm very excited because I have a special guest who is Sarah Dodsley. She is an empowerment and confidence coach, and I've been following her, and I've been in her Facebook group, and I've been doing the meditations and the thoughts and all of the things for, well, over a year now, and she's wonderful. And also Sarah uses, I'll let Sarah tell you in a minute, but Sarah uses a couple of really great techniques, one of which I have recently come to use with my kids because we've started doing tapping and it's had a huge impact. And I think the reason, actually, Sarah, thinking about it, the reason that I have started doing it is because I've seen you talking about it so much. So Sarah, tell us what you do, and could you tell us your two main tools? So I think that'll be really helpful for cycle breakers, especially anyone, but especially cycle breakers.
Yes, hello Laura, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here, and it's so good to hear that you've been using EFT yourself. It's
Yeah,
such a
so
powerful technique. So really amazing.
Wow.
So I'm an empowerment and confidence coach, and essentially what I do is subconscious transformation. So we spend a lot of our time, most of our time actually, about 95% of our day, our subconscious is running the show, which we don't have any control over.
Yeah.
It's
We
just
think we
there
do.
running in the
We
background.
think we
Yes,
do until we start
do.
investigating it, and then we realize that we don't.
We actually have no control. Yes, and we're on autopilot a lot of the time, and a lot of our programming is incredibly unhelpful. A lot of our program will be telling us we are not worthy, we are not good enough, we are stupid, we are bad people, all of the
And
things.
these are the stories that cycle breaker parents carry. This is why I think it's so powerful what you do and so incredible. And I didn't tell you this in my program, The Turning Point, the first pillar is about subconscious stories and subconscious transformation.
Amazing.
Because it's why I always talk about healing plus skills, that the skills won't stick. The skills won't stick until you've done your own healing, and nobody wants to hear that.
No, it's an uncomfortable truth, but it's so important. And it's not and I think people think it's going to be a lot harder than it actually is. And that's why the techniques that I use are incredible, because they are not painful. So essentially, we are carrying all of this programming that has been installed in us from the ages of 0 to 7, and then runs our lives for the rest of our lives. And when we start to uncover the unhelpful programming, we can actually rewire, we can actually change.
That's
the program
the positive
that
thing,
got
isn't
running
it?
the show. Yes,
And
it can be different.
I know I'm butting in. I'm so sorry. Because you keep saying stuff.
Fine.
The thing with cycle breaker parents is a lot of people think and truly believe, and unfortunately, mainstream media and news stories and even fiction enforces this, that if you had a rubbish start in life, if you grew up with an abuser, if you grew up witnessing domestic abuse, if one of your parents had alcoholism, whatever it is, and this is the ACEs model. I did a podcast on that where I basically picked apart the model of adverse childhood experiences, which says that if you had stuff happen in your childhood, your life is going to be less good, and you're going to have less education, you're going to earn less, your temper is going to be more easily triggered. You're basically not going to have as good a life because of your childhood. And actually, it's not true. It may well be true on a general population scale if there is no support, but like you just said, with support you can reprogram those messages and your life completely turns around. It's incredible.
Good news. You can change your programming, and it's not as difficult as people think. It's about having the right support and and having the tools. So the tools that I use, I'll get into those, are two things. One is called EFT, which stands for Emotional Freedom Technique, and the other is called Matrix Reimprinting. And I'll just talk briefly about both of them.
Please do.
EFT is, people may have heard of it as tapping.
Yeah, we have that app, the tapping solution app, which I've just been ranting about how wonderful it is. Because
it is amazing, absolutely amazing.
It's so accessible and
simple. It really is, and it works really well for the whole family. It with children particularly, and I tap with my own children. I tap myself, but I also tap with my children, and it is absolutely incredible, and they love it and they feel the benefit of it. You essentially tap on parts of the body, mainly the head, the face, and also your collarbone and your hands. And it sounds
collarbone bizarre. Is great in our house because our kids were like, "What's a collarbone?" And it turned out into a whole thing.
a whole science lesson.
Yeah, it did. It went into because we home educate. That was where it went, and the meridians came up.
Absolutely. It's so and there's so much in it, and it can feel a little bit strange the first time you do it. You think, why am I tapping on my face and my parts of my body? But what it does is we tap, and what we do while we're tapping is we talk about what we're feeling, and we get really clear on what the emotion is, where we feel it in the body, and we get very descriptive. So quite often people will feel tightness in their chest, or a gripping in their throat, or a tense, a headache feeling, whatever it is that we're feeling. We really tune into that feeling, and we talk about the emotion that is sitting beneath it, and we tap round and we give it an intensity level. So we really kind of work out, right, how strong is this feeling, and we tap. Now the beauty of this is it is teaching the body and the mind that we are safe to feel the emotion.
Yeah.
Now most of us have been
that's a huge thing for cycle breakers. Huge.
So important, because we're not comfortable with feeling big emotions, probably because most of us grew up in environments where we were either not safe to feel them, or we were told we were wrong to feel those emotions.
And actually, to be honest, that I know this is all about cycle breaker parents, so it all comes back to that in this context, but also that is kind of 70s, 80s, 90s parenting.
It is.
We didn't feel the feels. I did a post on Facebook and Instagram the other day about the screaming abdabs, that phrase, like, oh, just having the screaming abdabs. And I really thought that was a thing in my family, and loads of people said, oh yeah, and they came up with their own thing that their family said that dismissed big feelings. So it's not impossible, but it requires work for us as parents to say, and I know our kids are, rough. I think yours are a bit older than mine, but we still have, they're not like teenagers and grown up yet.
No.
And for us to say, okay, as a parent, that cycle stops with me. I am going to support my child with their big feelings. And that's a really great thing. And things like tapping are really helpful. We cannot fully do that. We can't use the technique until we are comfortable with big feelings in ourselves. And seeing them and witnessing them, and the idea of big feelings not making us feel ill or scared because we are not used to our own big feelings. And that's why, you just said you do it on yourself and with your children.
Yeah,
that's the way we break the cycle.
It always starts with you. It always starts with the parent, because, and like exactly as you just said, if you're not comfortable, they are not going to be comfortable. And it's really important to mention that none of this is about fixing anybody. It's not about dialing down any of this. It's about being able to feel it and knowing that will be like that for the rest of your life. You are always going to feel. And the more you can give yourself permission and have techniques that help you move through the emotions, like EFT, the ripple effect is tremendous.
Do you know what I'm just seeing? I know you're going to talk about it in a minute, but when you talk about the matrix reimprinting, is that you just said you give yourself permission, because perhaps you didn't have permission to feel big feelings, to have a meltdown when you were completely overwhelmed, or to be sad, or to be overjoyed and sometimes very boisterous with it. And here's the thing, is you get to do the healing and give yourself permission. It's the huge inner child work, isn't it? That you get to. It
really is. Yeah.
So I'll shush now. Tell us about that.
And that's the thing. All those moments, and everybody will remember those moments when they felt they were wrong in some way for feeling what they felt. Yeah. And a lot of the time we block it out, but if we tune in and with the right support, we get to remember those moments, and they're painful. And we carry that pain, that emotional charge forever. It doesn't go. And that's why when our child,
until we dissipate it. Yeah,
exactly. And that's why we feel triggered. So when our children feel those big emotions, we get triggered, because actually what's happening is we're going back to the time when we felt it and we were not safe to feel it. So here's where the matrix comes in, because the EFT helps us calm the body down and get clear on, when did this start for me? And the matrix is where we very, very safely go into the memory of where it started for you, and we get to change the impact that had on you. So for example, if you have a very traumatic memory of being, maybe being shouted at as a child, we go back into that memory very safely. It's not about reliving anything and re-traumatizing, but we get to
I think
look
that's
at,
a really
okay,
important thing, because people do sometimes, they shy away from the idea of the healing, and I've been there too. I'm a cycle breaker. I grew up in a house with a alcoholic parent who was sometimes really, really lovely when he was in his right space, and sometimes terrifying, and the idea of going back is horrifying. And then when you actually do it, when you find the person who suits you, because this is the other reason why I have so many guests on this podcast. No one person, and you'll know this as well, like, no one therapist. Sometimes you go through like 4 or 5 therapists before you find the one that you click with. And it's almost indefinable, but so maybe somebody watching or listening will be like, yes, I want that. And so that's why I want so many people on. But when I did it, when I went back and did my own healing about some of those things, it wasn't scary. It was actually, I felt really calm. And afterwards I was like, oh my goodness, I feel like I'm in up,
Yes, the weight is lifted,
and like you're full of helium or something. It's
and it's so important to mention that we think when we say like, oh, I don't want to go back there, what people don't often realize is that they are living with it all of the time.
Yes.
And the way that I work in the matrix is so safe that we're not, you don't, where we relive things a lot of time, we get triggered. Our children have big emotional, incidents, and we feel it. When we work in the matrix, we're not going back to relive that again. We're looking at it from a witnessing perspective.
Safe
really
space.
Figuring out what is that core belief that I formed that day. And it is often things like, I'm not loved, I am not worthy. And we get to change that. And when you change it at that core level, it changes so much for your
ripples,
day-to-day
like you said
life.
before, it ripples through. And then
beautiful.
how you show up with your kids is completely different.
It's completely different. And I've been doing EFT. I've been a coach for over a decade, but I've been using EFT and Matrix for nearly 2 years, and it has fundamentally changed the relationship with everybody in my house. I was the shouty parent. Because I was triggered all the time. I couldn't deal with the fact they were experiencing the big emotions. That doesn't happen now. My son had a huge emotional outburst last week, and I just sat with him and let him experience, and told him he was safe, told him he was okay to feel, and he came through it. It took a while, but he came through it, and he's not
the holding space.
Traumatized.
You can't hold space for other people unless you have that space.
You have to have the space yourself. So true.
And we get to make it. We get to make it. We get to find people like Sarah or me or other people who do it and make the space feel light and fluffy.
Yes.
And then when our children need us, we can sit with them.
That's right. It is really, and the more you do, it becomes, when you first start this work, I know it can feel overwhelming and scary, but once you start to get in, it really becomes, you become so fascinated by, where did that come from in my life? Right, I want to find that out, and I want to, I want to work with it. It becomes
and that's really about the curiosity, isn't it? It's about the swapping judgment for, like, I shouted at my kids, I lost it, I'm a terrible person. And when you start on the healing journey, like you said, it's strange and it's a bit awkward. It's like learning a new dance, isn't it? And then as you move on, you realize, and this is the things that clients have said to me, I just kind of suddenly realized that I was so many steps away from that, because I'd, still raise my, because we all do, because we're all parents and, we're all tired. We're not always going to be our best selves. And that's something for a different podcast, isn't it? But that idea where you maybe snap at a child and then go, oh, I'm really sorry I snapped. And then sort of sit back and go, wonder where that came from. And that is huge.
It's being human and
conscious,
and being conscious, and knowing that there will always be ruptures like that, but it's being able to recognize, forgive yourself, apologize. And I know you've spoken about the apology before, how important that is,
and the rupture and repair model, like you said.
Exactly. And you can move through it. It doesn't have to be a block and an obstacle and then something that we bury deep each time. We get to move through, and it becomes a lot more comfortable. I mean, I've seen it with my children, who are now, they're 6, 4 and 3,
And it was my 3-year-old. So my 4-year-old has big feelings a lot, and he needs support a lot to work through his big feelings. And that's just who he is. Now we're aware we have mechanisms in place within our family, and so he was sort of at the start of some big feelings. The lid was boiling. We've been in lockdown, and for 8 weeks we didn't even leave our apartment. We weren't allowed even downstairs to touch the ground outside or have fresh air, and we were on the 12th floor, so it felt like being in a goldfish bowl. Well, it was horrible. And by near the end of those 8 weeks, we were having more and more explosions. And I remember my 3-year-old touching my 4-year-old and saying, Bear, you've got to feel it, otherwise you hold on to it. Feel the feelings. And I was like,
that's so beautiful. That is so beautiful. And that happens. They start to they start to express in that way, and that is just like,
I know, and you think like that, all of this stuff, like, being a parent is hard, and being a human is hard, and having a job if you work outside of the home, or being in the home, it's all hard. It's all stuff and it's stuff that we get to enjoy and things, but there is a lot going on. And I think that if we can do the things like allowing ourselves to feel our feelings and supporting our children to feel their feelings, I think that is the foundation. That sets them up for life, much more than getting their homework done, much more than learning to do as they're told when they're told it. Absolutely. If we equip our children by gifting ourselves the permission to have that higher EQ, that understanding, that is the cycle is broken.
Absolutely. And the word wholehearted just came up as you were talking then, because it's about being the whole, the whole person. And for me, permission, acceptance, forgiveness, and love, and all of those things. We don't have to compartmentalize ourselves. We can just be and feel safe.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We need to walk the walk in order for our children to be able to. And actually, as a former teacher, it's that thing, you can't teach something unless you understand it yourself. And sometimes when you go to do it, so maybe you try and use a technique, because techniques have their place. And set phrases have their place. I will always say, I'm here and you're safe and I believe you. So these things do have their place. I teach the collaborative problem solve, which was originally in How to Talk So Kids Will Listen. It's a great technique. However, it won't work if we being the parents, in the emotional state to use it and to hold space for it. I think hold space is that really key thing, isn't it? We need to have space in order to hold space. My one really important question, which actually held me back from using EFT until I had realized, hilariously, it held me back until I did it anyway. Do people, and then I was like, oh, this is what's been holding me back.
I love that. I love that.
You have to know how tapping works before you do it.
No, you don't, because it's not. That's not the thing. That's the conscious mind going. I need to understand this, and I need to get it, and you don't actually, because you're not working
before.
No, you're not working with logic here. You're working with emotions and feelings, and where they are essentially stuck in the body. And knowing it isn't going to change it. Doing it will change it. That's it just do
and then
it.
Of course you can learn as you go. You can learn as you
can.
go.
Yeah, you can't really get it wrong. You can't get it wrong. That's the thing. You get to, the more you do, the more you figure out, okay, that works for me. Those phrases work for me. Yeah, there's no requirement of doing a course.
I think there is a point as well, though, with that. So I use the Tapping Solution app, which was recommended to a friend of mine who does it, because it has all kinds of things that I was telling you just before we pressed record about how when one of mine had some big feelings and we'd held space and he'd calmed down, and then he said, can I use the annoying brother one? And he wanted my phone, and he went in the tapping thing, and it starred, I can't be honest, it starred, which is sibling frustration. And for 7 minutes I did all of the tapping, and he did a few, but he was only 4. He did a few bits of the tapping, but he was listening and he was taking it in, and occasionally, he was grounding it with the tapping. And I think just, but also main thing is that he asked for it. So there is an element where you can just take something that has those, for me, these are already made. There's a morning one. We often use the turning the day around, because one of my children also has you know, oh, that went wrong. Well, and she said, that's the whole day then. I'm going to be miserable the entire day. And I know so many grown-ups who feel like that. So we do that. It's a 5-minute, like 4 or 5-minute thing. It's brilliant. So you can go it alone.
Yes.
And yet the power of having somebody who can guide you through it is incredible, isn't it? That
it is, because they see, you know, we are often, we get stuck in our limiting beliefs. So I think if you've got someone who can, you know, and that's why people work with me, because I will see a whole picture in front of me and be able to kind of tune in a little bit to, you know, oh man, I think there's something there, and I can mine beneath the meaning,
because you can't see it for yourself. This is really the point I was trying to get to, like you can't see it for yourself, and you're not supposed to see it for yourself, and you can't see it for yourself when you're also in an emotional state of not safety, what's the opposite of safety? I guess threat, but you know, emotionally insecure. You can't sit back, whereas we can all do it, can't we? We can all watch TV programs, be like, oh yes, we were watching Riverdale yesterday, and we're like, oh, Archie, he's the flawed hero. It's you can
see it when you're in a place of that's right. And you've got someone who can hold that. And I like, you know, the holding space is the perfect term for this, because you get to, like you did for your son, you held space. And actually with tapping, you can, if you're doing this with your children don't even have to tap. You will create the safe space by you doing the tapping and just sitting with them.
That's how I started. I started saying, I'm going to do this for the kids. The kids need it. Oh, well, the kids aren't doing it because it's new and it's scary. I'll do it. So I wasn't even thinking, you know, and this is me, and I've been doing the healing journey for ages, and I support others, but I couldn't see it in myself. And so I was like, oh, I will model it for them. And then I suddenly realized, I feel really calm.
Good,
And then I did a bedtime one and I fell asleep. Like, oh my gosh, this is incredible.
So powerful. And actually they use the term, it's part of they're aware of this within the EFT community. It's called borrowed benefits, where someone else gets the benefit of your tapping on their behalf, essentially. So you get it, but you actually, so that's actually a thing.
Borrowed benefit. Oh wow. I may invite you back for a whole podcast on that, because that's one of the premises of the cycle breaking community, is that we and all of us, irregardless of whether you had a complicated upbringing or a lovely upbringing, we're all trying to break cycles for our children. And we're working on ourselves. And the more work you do on yourself, the more you realize you get to do work on yourself because you're a human and you deserve it. But at the start of the journey, you know, we're two mums chatting here. At the start of that journey, it tends to be like, it's for my children. It's for my children. And that when we are calm, this is the meaning of self-care, isn't it? When we're calm, we shout less. And I guess that is borrowed benefit, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Oh, yes, we'll get into that another day. That's wonderful.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Sarah, for people listening and watching this who are very excited, like I clearly am, I'm actually dancing around in my chair, if you can't see on the podcast, where can people find you?
So I'm on Facebook and Instagram. So on Facebook, I am Sarah Dodsley, Empowerment and Confidence Coach, and I have a free group called the Empowered Collective.
I'm in it.
And Laura's there, so we can add a link. We can add a link to that. And then on Instagram, it's at Sarah Dodsley. Facebook, my Facebook group is probably the most, you'll get the most from me within there. So there's lots.
Yeah, you pop in and do so many, you know, dropping them in the meditation, or there's a few things where you've asked those questions. And then, I mean, I know a lot of Facebook groups, you know, they ask a question just to get people involved. But every time I've seen your questions, it's made me sit back and dig deep, and even without intending to, you know, when you're just scrolling, but even when you're scrolling, you know, you're scrolling on Facebook, and then I'll see one of your questions and I'll go, oh yeah, oh, that's a good one.
That's brilliant.
I love your group, and I obviously really love you. Thank you so much.
And it's open to everybody.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Sarah did touch on it as well. I'm going to put everything in the show notes, so don't worry about, you know, I've done this before where I've been running with a podcast and I'm like, oh, I need to know. It's all like you can just click through onto Sarah's Instagram and Facebook, and I will see you there because I follow Sarah too. Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Laura.
Speak to you soon. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye.